Hello, everyone in Franchise Canada land. Whether you're already part of the franchise community or thinking of joining, welcome to today's episode of Franchise Canada Chats. Gary Prenoveau here. I'm the author of the award-winning book, The Unstoppable Franchisee, and president of FranEd of Southern Ontario and Eastern Canada, a franchise search coach firm. Our guest on this episode of Franchise Canada Chats today is Ken Regular, a franchisee with the UPS store. He came to franchising after 2 decades as a journalist where he met criminals, celebrities, politicians, artists, and business leaders. During one interview, a CEO of a multinational company told him, "The most honest people I know are in business because you can't strike a deal with someone you don't trust." As a skeptical reporter, I love that. Ken, I'm looking forward to talking about that today. As a skeptical reporter, Ken found the statement difficult to believe, but the words stuck in his mind. As his media career grew, so did his interest in business. Juggling family life and their employer's demands during COVID-19, Ken and his partner Vicky decided it was time to make a move. They opened a UPS store in Brooklin, Ontario, in the middle of a pandemic lockdown, and now more than 3 years later, their business is growing as they build relationships and trust with their clients in the community. In addition to running their business, Ken is a board director with the Whitby Chamber of Commerce, and we're definitely going to talk about community involvement today. And Vicky serves on the UPS Store's Franchise Advisory Council. We're excited to have him on our podcast as a guest today. So Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this. I'm excited too.
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting to hear how journalism comes into entrepreneurship. Tell us a little bit about your background, Ken, and experience, and also what drew you to franchising. Then we'll get into why UPS stores.
Sure. I mean, ever since I was a child, I wanted to be in the media. I just broadcasting was something that I wanted to do. And, you can see here today, I still kind of keep a big microphone handy because as a child, my favorite toy was a microphone. Like I just
Cool.
loved it. I loved the idea of being able to communicate over a distance. I don't know, something about it just fascinated me. And so, that's all I pursued. That's all I wanted to pursue. It's really, it's hard to describe it other than being a calling. That was it for me. And I was very fortunate. I got to live my dream. It is broadcasting, and in particular journalism, is a difficult business to break into, to have a successful long career. And I was fortunate. Truly, I was fortunate. Some people would say, well, it was hard work and dedication and talent and so on. No, I was fortunate. I was dogged. There was just nothing else for me to do. And so, I went on. I mean, when I finally left journalism, I was working for CTV News here in Toronto, working in the largest local newsroom in the country. I was producing newscasts. I was writing news. I had, took turns on the assignment desk and doing all kinds of things. I spent many years as a reporter, on camera. And it was great. It was truly great. And like you mentioned, in the intro, really over time, my interests started to shift. That's truly what it was. And more and more, and to my surprise, I discovered that I was getting interested in business. Most people that you'll meet who are in journalism, in the media, they have no interest in business. That involves numbers. I'm a writer or I'm a creator. I don't understand business. It's not for me. And I was very much part of that group. And yet I started to become interested in it. And I started to become interested, without going way into detail, I started to get interested in management topics, leadership topics. And I really thought, because of the crisis that's happening in the journalism profession right now, and this is several years ago, I really thought that I needed to re-educate myself, learn about business, so that I could be someone who would get involved in building a new model for journalism and new model for media. And the truth of the matter is, it just led me straight out the door. I ended up working in corporate communications. I worked in corporate communications for Bell Canada. And during that time, my wife and I were really starting to think about starting our own business. And so that's where the path started into franchising. We started looking around and saying, you know, we'd like to have our own business. And frankly, it was driven by the fact that throughout our careers, we had had some pretty bad bosses. And in having bad bosses, that's what triggered my interest in management and leadership topics. And for my wife, Vicky, and I, we were also just tired. We were tired of answering to somebody else, feeling like we could not be self-directed. And so more and more the idea of having a business, taking that plunge, taking that risk looked more and more attractive. And that's kind of, how we got led in this direction.
Interesting. In my book, I talk about growth catalysts, when the pain of doing nothing, remaining where you are in the career comfort zone, but when the pain of doing nothing becomes greater than the pain and sacrifice of change. And you think about, it because you've lived it for a few years now. Going from being really good at something to learning how to be good at something else takes time and money and sacrifice. So the career disruption, the career dissatisfaction was your growth catalyst. And I love the comment about bad bosses, because we've all had a few. And you learn more about how to be a good boss by not being like that person, right? So
that's
okay,
exactly
so
right.
You started looking at business and franchising. Was there a reason why franchising versus over starting something from yourself, or did you go right at, you like the UPS store model? Like, tell us a little bit about that transition, please.
Well, I mean, why franchising? I think it's because it's scary to start a business. I mean, no matter what, like I went back to school. I ended up getting a master's degree in business management. I really said, let's do a big transformation here. My wife had been working in the not-for-profit sector. And so, this was a big transformation. Now, she's also very good at accounting, bookkeeping. She's a payroll specialist. So she really had a lot of those key skills that are important. But, franchising, it's scary to get into a business. And it's scary because you don't know what you don't know, truthfully. And so franchising appealed to us because, you're dealing with proven models, proven ideas, or at least, you should be dealing with proven models and proven ideas. We certainly know all of the big names, the UPS store being one of them, that are proven models. But we started to look around, like what's out there and what appeals to us and what do we think we could do and what do we want to do. And franchising just seemed like a natural way to go. And when I say it's scary that you don't know what you don't know, going out someday and renting a space and hanging out a shingle and saying, I'm now in business, you don't know. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you need. You don't know what the pitfalls are. Franchising smooths over those rough spots. And I think that's what attracted us right from the get-go.
Okay. And so you looked around and you settled on UPS stores.
You know what? We looked around for a few years.
Oh, that long. Okay.
Yeah, we really did. We looked around for a few years, and we actually had a handful of false starts. And what I mean by false starts is, we would look at a business, we would think about acquiring like an existing business. So the owner was selling, and it wouldn't work out because, well, maybe the financing wasn't right. We couldn't get the financing together, or there was something there that we didn't like. It wasn't acceptable to us. And, we just said, okay, that's a deal breaker, or, what have you. Like there were 2, 3, perhaps even 4, as I look back on it now, where we said, okay, this seems like a good idea. We pursued it, and then it was a dead end. And I'll be honest with you, it was during the pandemic. We were working from home. I remember sitting at my desk which I had set up a temporary desk in my living room, telephone, computer, whatever, working away. My wife was working somewhere else. Our daughter was going to school in another room. Remember those horrible days.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been pursuing and pursuing and pursuing one particular business, and it really just fell apart. And we looked at each other and we said, I guess it's not the right time. Let's drop this. Let's just drop this now. And we did. We said, let's forget about it, at least forget about it for a while. And I was sitting at my desk and I saw a notice come across my computer about an upcoming franchising webinar for the UPS Store Canada. And I went, the UPS Store. I had forgotten about them. Gee, when we lived in Pickering, I went to the UPS Store a couple of times. That seems like a nice business. Maybe I should join that webinar. That was the thought process. I'm not even sure I consulted with Vicky. I just sort of signed up. And I went to the webinar, and within 2 weeks of that webinar, we were standing on a sidewalk with the director of franchise development at the UPS Store, outside a space that would eventually become our store.
Wow,
it just
that's cool.
Clicked, and it clicked, I guess, for a lot of reasons. We really liked the idea of, without to denigrate any other franchise, we really liked the idea of a clean business. Not one where you're dealing with a lot of food or a lot of prep, one where you're not dealing with, use your imagination. We also liked the idea of the UPS Store being business to business. I mean, yes, it is a retail business, but it also has this other side where you're dealing with other small businesses, and we really liked that. It appealed to us. The fact that it keeps business hours really appealed to us. Then we dug deeper into the model and said, oh yeah, this really does. Like, I could see us doing this. And it connected with a lot of the work experiences that she and I had over our careers. Things like, she had worked, like I said, in the not-for-profit sector and often spent a lot of time at very large printing machines, those large Xerox production type printers, printing something for the organization that she was working for. So she was kind of familiar with them. And that made a lot of sense to us. Hey, we could leverage that experience. I had experience in photography and had experience in, using Photoshop and so on. Hey, we can use those skills. Similarly, just the whole idea of shipping and international shipping and these sorts of things. Wow, found that kind of interesting. It just started to click after a whole bunch of false starts. Now we were hitting on something that really connected with who we were as people and as a couple.
And as I listen to you explain this and share this, Ken, what I'm hearing all the way back to when you were talking about looking at the existing businesses for sale, it's clear to me you had a set of criteria. It sounds like you and Vicky took time ahead of time saying, this is what we want. This is what's important to us. And when you start mentioning UPS stores, daytime hours, B2B, like those are examples of criteria. Been my experience, a lot of people don't spend enough time looking at their criteria and they rush into things. So I love that you did that. And then you talk about one of my favorite elements is transferable, leverageable skills. See, I believe you talk about the importance of the franchise system to smooth out the bumps. You can take the best system in the world, but if the franchisee doesn't have the transferable skills to execute the requirements of a business, they're still going to struggle. So you found something where both of your skills was a solid fit. And then you talk about the timeline being fast to be able to get it. That's really fast. So okay, so now you're in business and you've got these journalism skills and all the communication, the other things. So tell our listeners how that transfer of skills and how you got to use those in the UPS store.
Vicky and I, we split a lot of our work. Yes, we can both work in the store, run the store, that sort of thing. But in many ways, what's happened is, she is handling given her background in bookkeeping, accounting, in payroll, these sorts of things, she handles a lot of that day-to-day administrative work, which, I mean, for a lot of people is a real challenge. I was able to leverage my media background and able to leverage my experience in corporate communications from when I worked with Bell Canada, from the point of view of saying, okay, I am going to start advertising and marketing this business, and really thinking deeply about marketing and how we're going to present ourselves in the world. I mean, one of the interesting challenges that you have with a franchise is that people don't often realize when they go to a big brand name store that it's owned by somebody that lives in that community, that it's really a small business. What they see is they see the big brand name. And when you talk about the UPS store, UPS is one of the world's most recognizable brands. And so we started to think very deeply right from the beginning, how do we differentiate ourselves? We're building a brand new store in a small but growing community of Brooklyn. And we need to differentiate. We need people to understand who we are and what we are. And so I began to craft messaging that would go on social media, that would go in paid advertising, that would go out in every interaction across the counter, that showed people that we were a husband and wife team, that we were the owners. We weren't UPS store, corporate store. We were Ken and Vicky. And we have stuck to that messaging for more than 3 years now. We want people to see that. And so, we've been able to use those kinds of skills that I had, that Vicky had, to really put in place a lot of the strong building blocks. I mean, if you don't have good financial management, and I rely on Vicky for good financial management. If you don't have good financial management in the early days of starting a business from zero, and we opened in the middle of a pandemic lockdown. So, if you don't have good financial management, if you don't have a good financial plan, if you don't have a good way to implement that stuff, you're dead in the water. So, as I was saying, we were really, we really worked hard to leverage our specific backgrounds to build those strong foundations, to give this, to give the business a good leg up, but also to break down that wall, to break down the wall that says, this is a corporate store. We wanted people to walk in and we wanted them to know who we are. We wanted them to know that we were a part of the community. We wanted people to know that what they were going to get here was not an impersonal experience. We were going to have one-to-one relationships with people because that's who we were.
There's a few thoughts that come into my head at the same time. The first is on the brand. I've said many times it is never the franchisor's job to bring the franchisee customers. It is the franchise, and a lot of people get surprised by that. It's the franchisor's job to bring the franchisee a marketing strategy. It is the franchisee's job to execute it. So you've done that, but you've also taken it down into a deeper level, which is tying that sense of community, engaging the community, but engaging the community as people who you are, and giving them the experience, a specific experience that you aim to deliver from the very beginning, and you've stuck to that. So people know what they're going to get, and that personal level service, that husband and wife, and Brooklyn being the community that it is, smaller community at the edge of a big city. In smaller communities, it's like being part of it is really important, compared much more so than in a big city.
Absolutely. And franchising is interesting because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. I am really fortunate to have the UPS store brand above my door. I sell more shipping and more printing because that's above my door.
Yeah.
And so that's wonderful. That's powerful. That's why you buy into a franchise. But at the same time, people begin to think that this is just a corporate store and it's indifferent. And so you have to combat that. But you have to combat it in a positive way. And so you do that through customer service. You do that through one-on-one interactions. You do that through, consistent messaging through your social media channels, through your advertising, whatever. You do that by sponsoring a local hockey team, truthfully. All of those things get you out into the community.
The community is, you got the geographic community, the business community, different people they'll get involved in the faith community or other communities are all part of serving and becoming visible and mining in each opportunity. So it sounds like you're doing that really well.
Yeah, I mean, that's really been my focus in many ways in the business, not entirely. I mean, Vicky is involved in that too. But for instance, you mentioned earlier that I'm involved in the Chamber of Commerce. And boy, if I had a piece of advice to give to any business person, whether they're in a franchise or not, it's to join your Chamber of Commerce or join a networking group or join Rotary or a similar community service group. The benefits to your business are immense because you're getting involved in the community. You're making connections with people who could eventually be your clients, but you're also gaining a community for yourself. Running a business is lonely. It can be extremely lonely. And one of the wonderful things that, Vicky and I have found in joining the Chamber of Commerce is that we didn't find a group of stodgy old people who are sitting around having a conversation about the latest trends and what happened last quarter. We found a community of like-minded people, and we're friends with people who are our competitors, but we share something in common. And boy, that's useful.
And that's one of the strengths of franchising. You have the community of the franchisees and the franchisor, but you're tying it to also engaging the community. In my book, I talk about community as one of the key elements of success in franchising. Is it's not just being part of the community, it's contributing to the community as well as drawing from it. And there's, as I said, there's different levels of community. So well done. And one of the questions I had for you was both you and Vicky are in different service organizations or types of service. So it's not just joining, it's serving. So tell our listeners a little bit about that, please.
Wow, Vicky has been involved even before we were in business. She was involved in the SCC group within our daughter's school. And so, she did that because she wanted to be connected with the school community. She wanted to be connected with what's happening in our daughter's life. It was a typical motherly thing to do. But in the process, of course, you meet people and you make connections and so on. We received the recommendation from the UPS Store's head office when we were starting our business, join your Chamber of Commerce. And so for us, it became a checklist. And yep, okay, checklist item, checklist item, checklist item. It's what it's like. And we joined the Chamber of Commerce and thought, okay, next. And then we started to get involved and go to meetings and meet people. And then they're looking at me kind of going, what do you think about hosting a monthly coffee meeting that we do? Just once a month. So I started hosting that and was really enjoying it. And I still do it. I've been doing it now for a couple of years. And that led me into running for the board of directors. And then after being on the board of directors for a period of time, they're looking at me saying, hey, come join the executive committee. That kind of involvement, I mean, honestly, it's hard. Vicky is, also involved directly in the Franchise Advisory Council within our franchise network. It's a commitment of time. And so we have
Hmm.
a lot of commitments of time that we're juggling. Time in the store, the time outside the store, networking time, community service time. It all fits together, A, to benefit our business, but B, you know what? It makes us just more well-rounded people. We're connected in our community in a way that when we were employees, we weren't. And that's
And
a
one of the
very interesting thing.
very much so. One of the things I love about board work, I'm on the board for the Canadian Franchise Association. You get to see how other people think and process information and make decisions, and you can't help but learn from that. So it, it's part of getting involved. You're getting some benefits for the business, but you're also getting some personal learning and again that reach out.
It is growth, and it takes you outside of your comfort zone. I mean, having been in the media, my comfort zone, uh, I don't mind standing in front of a group of people and giving a presentation. I don't mind hosting a meeting where there's a group of people who need a topic to discuss, and I'm moderating the topic. For Vicky, that's way outside of her comfort zone. Uh, and so she's had an opportunity to do some of those things and to stretch herself. Uh, for me, one of the things that was a big challenge getting into business is the idea of sales. Like, oh my goodness, I've got to be a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not that stereotypical. I can't make cold calls. I could pick up the phone and call a politician and say, I need an interview now. But to call someone up and say, hey, I got this product or I have this service, you really need to do some work with me. Oh, that felt uncomfortable. And those kinds of involvements, those kinds of community involvements, you're right, you learn from other people and you see how other people do it. And suddenly I begin to realize that sales is really more about building relationships and getting to know someone and planting a seed for the future. It's not cold calling and trying to close the deal. Vicky begins to realize, hey, networking is not so bad. I'm going to sit down over lunch and I'm going to talk to someone and tell them what my business does. And next thing and so that kind of experience, like you said, it is a stretching experience. It's a chance to learn and develop and to realize that these challenges that you've perhaps built up in your mind are not as big because you can see somebody else doing it. And I love to say, hey, look, somebody else has done this. I can probably do it too.
I share that mentality and the competitive nature that I grew up with and instilled in me. Add on, and I can probably do it better. Right.
Right.
So, but it's interesting. I want to come back to the subject of sales because I get that a lot when I'm working with people trying to figure out what business they should be buying. They say I'm not good at sales, but they've been in leadership and they've been in other roles of communication all their career. So if they take prospecting out, they're very good at the process of sales, the skills around sales, because there's problem solving, needs assessment, presenting. They've been doing that all their career. They've just not been asking for money for it. So networking is a form of prospecting, community engagement. Those are all and like all those different things. Those are soft elements of prospecting. So it's for people understanding, hey, I do have to help the potential buyer understand the value of my product or service. Now, how do I get in front of them? And that's where the different strategies come into play. And the other thing, we touched on this earlier, I'll just reiterate it here, Ken, is part of that as you go from out of your comfort zone to beginner to competent to proficient. That's where the franchise or assistant process of coaching come along the way to help accelerate that. So again, back to the benefits of franchising compared to doing it on your own. As we start winding down a bit, I am curious about technology. Technology is
Hmm.
touching on a lot of businesses, very with AI and other things right now. So tell us a little bit about where does technology come into play in the running of your business?
Unfortunately, it means more computers than I care to have a relationship with. everything we do is technology driven. And I guess we can say that in almost all of our businesses and all parts of our lives, technology has really become a central focus. Uh, you know, what we do, like I said, if you're talking about shipping, worldwide shipping, if you're talking about printing, it's all technology driven. But for instance, if you think of the rise of online shopping that happened during the pandemic and then post
Hmm.
pandemic, and then what came out of that was an explosion of returns. Uh, we deal with a lot of return shipments to places like Amazon or other retailers. And as a result, that was all technology driven. Scan a barcode, place it on a shelf, it's tracked as it goes along its way. But the explosion has meant that we have to start using this technology in new and different ways to try and make the process more efficient, more effective, to be more responsive. And I mean, like I said, our store has been open for a little over 3 years, and we've seen that change over that period of time. And so technology is really playing a role, not in the sense of we need a new technology for this, but in the sense that we need to use our technology better and create more efficiencies. I find that that's on a granular level, that's what we're doing in our store. On a more macro level, that's what our franchise network is doing, is trying to find ways, okay, how do we deal with this? I mean, for things like commercial printing, the UPS store has always been the largest chain of copy print centers in Canada. Great. But people are shopping online. And it's not just people, it's not just individuals, it's businesses. We're very much B2B. And sometimes, they want to place a commercial print order and they need to do it online. They want to do it online. And so we have really been, as a network, focusing on how do we deliver those options electronically to people where they're sitting. And then that brings this great advantage of being able to say, you as a business person who needs to print something, needs to print 1,000 or 10,000 brochures, you can not only get that brochure order in from your desktop, but you can choose where you're going to pick it up. You can choose where it gets printed. You can choose a lot of things. And so we're now leveraging the strengths of our network. And that's really remarkable to see. And I think, in many ways, a couple of years out from the pandemic, we're just seeing the beginnings. This is the infancy of the kinds of technological, not transformations, but really technological rethinks that are
There's a
happening.
lot, yeah, there's a lot of evolution. And I go back to the pandemic. What I observed personally as I worked with a lot of franchisors in the early days, the speed at which franchisors and franchisees and suppliers and customers work together to bring new solutions into place that we're sometimes 4 or 5 years out on the drawing board. All of a sudden, we need this now. And the part of the learning from that was a lot of great franchise systems that brought them the communication together far more frequently and far more effectively than previous to the pandemic, and that has stayed. So if you're an independent business owner and you've got some of these things to figure out, you just can't compete with a good franchise system who has got that body of talent and different ranges of talent. So there's a lot of reasons why franchising is such a strong model now. Coming back to the research before you bought, Ken, a lot of our listeners are would-be franchisees.
Mhm.
What could maybe share a couple of minutes what the process was that you used to start narrowing things down or at least assessing them, and then what advice do you have for them now that you're a few years in and looking at the other side of it?
It's interesting. Our store is a training store in our network. And so this week we have two people in our store who are in the process of acquiring an existing location in another city. And they're observing us and training with us. And so it's very interesting to be a training store because it makes you cast your mind back to when we were in that position. And you're right, you kind of sit back and think, wow, okay, 3 years in, I know so much more. And I didn't quite realize that I do, because I still feel very new. I still feel junior, as it were. Uh, the research part, I mean, admittedly, given my background in journalism, I perhaps over research. And so I went anywhere and everywhere that I could get information. But I think one of the very early initial things that I did was, you can get that Canadian Franchise magazine, comes from the Canadian Franchise Association, where it's literally a listing of franchises in Canada broken down by sector. Get one of those. I don't know how much they cost. I can't remember now. I've got a copy lying around here in my office somewhere. Get one of those and thumb through it and see what's out there. And that was really the initial step for us, was just kind of going, what's out there? What is a franchise? Is there something out there that we might like to do? I mean, then after that, if you do see something and you say, I might be interested in that, send an email, make a phone call, you have a conversation. The research can be even as simple as go to one of those places, be a customer, come up with an excuse to go there, and put on a different set of glasses, so to speak. So you're not walking in thinking transactionally, where I need to buy this particular thing. You're walking in kind of going, how do they do things? What's it like here? What's the process? And so you begin to observe your transaction through that lens. And I think that's very helpful. And I mean, do that in a quick serve restaurant, do that in a UPS store, do that in a drugstore chain, do that in a grocery store. Yeah. If you can kind of step back and give yourself a different perspective, I think all of those things, those practices, are really good research.
I find it fascinating that you did that organically. I tell my clients, look, go into for 2 weeks, go into every business you go into, look at the business from an owner's eyes. If this was your center or store, or whatever the business model is, what would you do? How would you run it? What would you like doing? This is really important. What would you like doing? What would you not like doing? What type of customer do you want? What kind of staff do you want? This gets back into some of the criteria we talked earlier. So the more that people discover about themselves, the more likely they're going to understand what it takes to execute that business. And that's one of the things that people miss, I think, when they're looking at businesses. They fall in love with the product or the service instead of falling in love with the work it takes to put the product or service in the customer's hands. You got to believe in the value proposition. You got to love the work if you're going to be successful.
Yeah, and there's a real easy temptation to think, okay, I'm going to get into this business and I'm going to love it. And so I'm going to buy a bakery because I love baking. And the truth of the matter is, you may love baking, but you're probably going to hate it in this franchised bakery, because what you're buying into is not getting up at 4 every morning and baking bread. Right? You're getting into the business of hiring people and leading people. You're getting into the business of managing the books, and you're getting into the business of advertising and marketing this. And if you don't enjoy those things, you're going to have a miserable time, because you're spending no time baking bread. You know?
And this is so important for people to understand is where is the time going to be, and what is the value of their time, going back to criteria. What have I not asked you that you would ask you, Ken? You've got some great experience, both pre-franchising, now during franchising. As our listeners are hearing your story, what would you share that I haven't asked you about? What's important?
I mean, one of the questions that I was dealing with just ahead of this was really, what advice would you give to people looking to get into franchising for the first time? And we've really covered that in multiple ways all along the way. But I guess if that question was posed to me, I would go back and say, look, really think about who you are as a person. I mean, I've spoken to franchisees. Look, sometimes people get into a business and they're not cut out for it. And I've spoken to people who found out that they were just simply not cut out for the business that they decided that they were going to buy into. Really have a good, my advice would be to really have a good idea of who you are as an individual, right? Yes, you're going to stretch, you're going to get out of your comfort zone. Yes, you're going to discover new skills you didn't know you had. But if something is a deal breaker for you right now before you start, if it's an absolute, drop dead deal breaker and it's involved in this business, don't do it. Don't do it. Go in with the attitude that I am going to grow, that I am going to change, that I am going to discover things, that I am going to be uncomfortable, that the other piece of advice I would give people is don't delude yourself into thinking that I've just bought into this great, big, powerful franchise brand and money is going to rain down from the heavens the day I open the door. You are running a business, and it's your business, and you own it. You're responsible for it, and you can go broke. So
It takes work, doesn't it? And it's so many people think it's going to go faster and it's going to be easier. This is one of the hardest things people will do. And I can't say every, but almost every client I've ever worked with, I've worked with over 2,000 people over the course of 22 years, helping them find businesses. They've all said after they bought, it took longer and it was way harder than I thought it would be. But man, when the ones who get it right, has it been worth it? I had one client say, Gary, thank you for giving 17 years of my life back. I can't imagine what it would have been like if I stayed in corporate.
I feel the same way. Like as stressful as it can be, as difficult as it can be, as uncertain sometimes, that you're sitting there saying, are we going to get enough sales to be able to pay this bill? Are we going to be able to get enough sales in order to, pay ourselves? And that's stress, and it's stress that I never had in my corporate working life. I wouldn't turn back. I really wouldn't. But that stress is there. And if that stress is too much for you, don't do it. Like, really have the honest conversation with yourself before you start to leap into it, and really take the blinders off. You are running a business. And if you've heard it 1,000 times that running a business is hard and you haven't internalized it, now's the time to internalize it. It is going to be hard. It is going to be stressful. It is going to be scary. Even if it is a franchise, and the UPS store is a great franchise, but guess what? It's scary. It can fail. And you're the one that's responsible. So,
well said on a number of fronts. It takes work. It takes effort. As part of your research, folks, as you're listening, talk to 6 to 10 existing franchisees. What is the work it takes to achieve your level of goals? Asking people how much money they make is the wrong question. What are your goals, and what is the work it takes to achieve that amount of money in the systems you're looking at? And what are the other criteria? What does it take to build? If you want to work daytime hours, whatever it is, there's 10 to 14 criteria that we help our clients look at. Well, anything else as we wrap up? Is there final thoughts, Ken, that you'd like to share? This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate your wisdom.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know if there are any final thoughts. I mean, my days are often just so busy that I find myself sitting down at the end of the day and kind of going, okay, what's up for tomorrow? I think a final thought is, don't burn out. Whatever you do, this is very demanding. It's also very invigorating. but it's easy to burn out. It's easy to get overwhelmed, and you have to prioritize yourself. In the case of me and Vicky, we have to prioritize each other. We have to prioritize our family. You know, it's wonderful to run a business. It's wonderful to have successes. When we land the big sale, it's a great thrill. Uh, but it's all meaningless if we're ignoring our family, if we're ignoring our relationship, if we're ignoring the things that are important. And so you really have to go all in, work hard, realize that it's going to be immensely stressful, and then step back from it and decompress and spend time uh, doing other things and refocusing, because that, in the end, that's what it's going to take to build your business, and that's what it's going to take to keep you from having a heart attack.
Well, it's work, reflect, rest and reflect, recharge, and go back to work. That's the
Right.
pattern, right? And along the way, part of the reflection is, where do I need to grow? Because if you're going to become a business owner, growth is part. You're signing up to be a lifetime learner. For as long as you own the business, you're learning.
Yes.
Well, thank you again for sharing your thoughts. I really appreciate your time. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, that's a wrap for this episode of Franchise Canada Chats. Thank you for joining us.